You're listening to the Visible Expert Podcast, where we share stories, research, and actionable insights to help B2B marketers and practitioners drive extraordinary growth in their professional lives. Thanks for tuning in to the Visible Expert Podcast. I'm John Tyerman.
And I'm Kelly Waffle.
And today we sat down and interviewed Hinge's own managing partner, Lee Fredrickson. So you'll be able to hear that interview. He goes into his story about how he left academia and became an entrepreneur. And I learned some things about Lee that I hadn't known before.
I thought it was great from the perspective of he could look at things from different perspectives. So like you said, he had been in the academic world and then was a tenured professor and then actually made the transition over to the business world. And, a lot of people can't do that. And he was able to do that and really become a visible expert in three different areas along the way. So I found that to be very interesting.
Yeah, I really liked the advice that if you're looking to grow as a professional, to focus, to have a plan, and be consistent. I thought those were some things that we consistently hear from the other experts that we interview, and it was good to hear him say that.
Well, and also the comments he made a little bit earlier around leadership, that you can accomplish anything by not asking for credit.
Yeah.
We hear that over and over again with almost every interview we do with these visible experts, is they say they put it out there and they're not looking for credit for it.
So we've got some new ratings and reviews for our podcast on Apple Podcast, and if you listen to this show and you find it valuable, please rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps us out. I'd like to read a review from Neil Ensman, who said, "Love the David Baker podcast on the business of expertise. The conversation was easy to understand and full of incredible insights. It prompted me to get his book, which I feel was written for me." So thank you.
Hey, thanks, Neil. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Neil. So this episode of the Visible Expert Podcast is sponsored by the Hinge Research Institute. And if you're involved in marketing demand or lead generation and want to use a data-driven approach to content strategy, consider using original research. The Hinge Research Institute offers a range of services from tiered sponsorships of original studies to custom research on specific industry challenges. And we found that high-growth professional services firms are 3 times more likely than no-growth firms to use original research in their content strategy. And, according to Forbes, companies who adopt a data-driven approach to marketing are 6 times more likely to be profitable year over year. If you're interested in learning more, email us at research@hingemarketing.com, and we'll find the right approach to using original research for you. All right, and here comes our chat with Lee. Our guest today is Hinge's own managing partner, Lee Fredrickson. Lee has a Ph.D. in behavioral psychology and left academia to start 3 high-growth companies. He has co-authored several books on marketing and management, including The Visible Expert. Lee, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
It's fun to sit down with you here in the studio.
It is, indeed.
I think we're going to learn a lot today.
I think so, too.
We'll see, huh?
Yeah. So, Lee, welcome to the show. And here at Hinge, as you know, we define recognized influencers who share their expertise in the B2B and professional services spaces as visible experts. So with this podcast, we like to focus on sharing the stories of our guests and really illuminating the challenges and rewards they encountered as they built their personal brands. So can you spend a couple of minutes and talk to us about your journey to becoming a visible expert?
Wow, okay. The interesting thing is, I was just telling you, gents, before we started here, is that I've actually been a visible expert in 3 different areas at 3 different times in my career. And, I didn't realize this till we got involved in really focusing in on the concept of visible expertise. And as you said in the introduction, I started out as a behavioral psychologist. And the first area I did research on was smoking cessation. And it happened after I was in graduate school. My advisor said, "Hey, the local lung association wants to do a smoking cessation class. Can you do it?" And sure, so we did it as a piece of research. And one thing led to another, and I became known because at that time the approach to smoking cessation was all cold turkey. That's it. If you didn't do it cold turkey, you weren't doing it right. And so, being kind of a contrarian, I said, well, what about a gradual approach? And we did that, and it led to a series of research that came up with the concept of controlled smoking, that not everyone quits, and if you don't quit, can you reduce the risk? Which was the opposite way of thinking about it than most people had. And I began to develop a reputation as someone who would do this, and the next thing I know, I was invited to sit on a science advisory board for the National Institutes of National Science Foundation to develop a approach to reducing smoking risk nationally. And I remember distinctly walking up to this imposing building in Washington and thinking, oh my God, I'm just a little assistant professor, what do I know, you know? And so I walked into this big gilded room, probably 100 feet long, with a big table around, and here's all these people I've been citing in my research from Harvard and Yale and Stanford and all over. I was sitting at the same table with these guys. And midway through the morning, it dawned on me, these guys don't know anything more than I do. They put their pants on one leg at a time. You know, they're just somebody who's focused in on something and then taken. And, you know, I thought, well, why am I sitting here? And it's because I brought something different to the table, a different approach, a different view that it hadn't. And I began to, as I accumulated more experience working with these folks, it became clear to me that how other opportunities were bubbling to the surface. I now knew these folks, knew all the experts in the field, and we were colleagues. We were working on things together. And so that kind of led to a change in my career, where I ended up going to Virginia Tech. And one of the things about Virginia Tech is in a rural area, and running smoking programs there would very difficult to do because there are not that many people. So I focused on other areas of research, and I was actually doing a lot of work in public health at that time, and I got interested in this. It looked like, as I dug deeper into it, that all we did was spend time developing a program and then trying to get people to use it. But people are doing this. It's called marketing. So I started to educate myself on marketing, and I realized that there's a whole different way of approaching it, and I fell in love with marketing, and I fell in love with business. So I was doing the work on large-scale projects in business, behavior change projects. And there was a growing area within the field that was called organizational behavior management, which is applying these behavioral principles to behavior in organizations. So to make a longer story short, I identified all the people that were the leaders in this field, and I got them all together to put together a book that had all of the leading people, and I edited the book. And I also ended up editing a journal in there because I knew how to do that from my previous experience. And what happened is, in a very short period of time, this book came out, and I was a leading expert in organizational behavior management. And I thought, whoa, how did that happen? The other took me years and years, and this happened very quickly. And I learned about the power of, having networking with other experts and learning from them and bringing and consolidating their information. So that was kind of the second time I got okay, and I ended up realizing that I was actually more of an entrepreneur, and so I went to one of the big eights and spent some time there. but a gentleman approached me about that stuff I'd done way back in the smoking time. He said, I have an idea to develop a program to help reduce people using a gradual approach. And so he looked up the experts in it, and he called this guy at Harvard, and he said, "Oh no, you don't want to talk to me. You want to talk to Lee Fredrickson. He's the guy in That's the guy that knows that." So the reputation followed me, and I ended up talking to him, and one thing led to another, and we started a company where we developed a small handheld computer that was the size of a credit card, and that helped people gradually withdraw from smoking. And we couldn't sell them. We couldn't figure out how to sell them. There's no list of smokers. All the cigarette companies had brought those up. And if there's anyone, so you couldn't get a list of smokers. You couldn't do anything. So we finally figured out how to use television to tell a story about people quitting smoking and this new approach that people hadn't tried with marketing. And what happened is it took off. And we went from doing less than $1 million of business in 1 year to doing $20 million of business 9 months later.
Wow.
And so that's where I became interested in high growth, and where I started to realize, wow, this research stuff really, really makes a difference. So that's how I got involved in marketing. And at one point in my career, I realized that, I was sort of at the point where I could do what I wanted to do and what did I enjoy most. And that was marketing and coming up with strategies and research-based things. So, and I looked around at what was the central core of my career, and a lot of it was in professional services. So that's how I got involved in marketing professional services. It was the most difficult thing I could think of to do that involved the things I loved.
Wow, there you go.
So it sounds like that was an easy transition for you, going from academia to professional services marketing. What did you see what was that transition like? Was it hard to leave the academic world?
I guess I'm either blessed or cursed I'm the kind of person that when I think about what I'm going to do, and then when I make a decision, I don't look back. So I never have regretted it. It was a big shock going from academic, or by that time I was already a tenured professor, and so giving that up and going into business, some would say, is not very smart, but that's what I did. And I think the hardest adjustment is the difference in pace.
Yeah.
And how fast things move, and especially the world today in professional services, very fast-paced.
So why professional services? Was it the challenge that you mentioned? Or?
Yeah, at that point, I'd actually I'd run several companies that were in professional services, so it was an area I knew very well, and I knew some of the challenges of marketing there, and I knew that most professional services marketing sucked, and I really hated it. It was sucked in that it was bad marketing. I could tell it was bad marketing. It wasn't based on anything. And I hated it part was I didn't like the concept of just networking and just trying to ingratiate yourself with people. Yeah. That, to me, never really felt like it was very genuine and honest. And I always enjoyed learning new things and educating people and helping them grow and develop. And frankly, that's what we actually do here. We help develop insight for firms, for individuals. We help them grow and achieve what they want to. So I've found a lot of rewards in it. But as many things in retrospect, it looks like it was all planned. But in reality, it was one development led to the next development, led to the next one.
A wise man once told me, if you dwell in the past, you die in the past. So,
amen.
I'd like to dwell in the past a little bit more here, Lee. Talking about your startup. You said you took it from less than $1 million to 20 million, and I believe it finally went up to 80 million. What lessons did you learn along the way with that?
Great question. I think the most overriding lesson I learned is that marketing really does matter. Understanding how your prospect thinks about things really makes a difference. And let me give you the concrete example, the concrete insight that changed everything for us.
Okay.
We started out like most people trying to market a smoking cessation program with the notion of you should quit smoking. But when we actually got in and actually did the research, we realized people were sick and tired of hearing people say they should quit smoking. And every time they did that, the defenses went up and they couldn't hear anything else. And what they would say is like, I've tried, but I don't know, I've tried everything and nothing works. So the message that they really wanted to hear when it boiled down to, here's something you haven't tried before. And that, as simple as that seems, and we combine that with kind of, we understand where you are, so it's when you're ready to quit, here's something you haven't tried before. And that, as I said, had a lightning rod effect. And once we got the message right to the right people, it changed everything.
It's not like they don't want to quit.
Yeah, they already want to quit. They just don't know how, and so when you say, when you're ready, we've got something you haven't tried, say, okay, I'm going to give that a try.
Exactly.
That's great.
So Lee, you talked about being an expert in high growth professional services firms. I've heard this question asked many, many times by our clients. What do you mean by high growth? How do you define what high growth is?
Sure. We had to come up with a definition, an operational definition of it. So we settled on 20% growth compounded annually. So 20% annual compound top line growth. That's how we operationally defined high growth. And as it turned out, that's actually turned out to be a pretty handy definition. It's not an unattainable amount for professional services firms. Many do it. But sustaining that really takes, you've got a good vein. You've got something that's really working if you can sustain that kind of growth year over year.
So how are firms doing? How are they sustaining it? What are some of the characteristics?
I think probably the overwhelming, and when you try to generalize to all firms, it becomes a little abstract, but I think it really sets on the bedrock of really understanding their clients and what they're really going through, and being able to have actual solutions to real problems that the clients face. And if you can do that and communicate that to them in an efficient way, you're going to experience growth. And where firms fall short is they think they understand their client because they spend so much time, but they don't really understand their client.
They think they know their clients.
Yeah, they think they know their client. They're sure they know their client, but there's one little important fact you didn't know. Like, oh, the keys are back home. So again, you forgot your keys, or one little important. Oh, that's a micro. They only take PowerPoint. They don't take Keynote. So it's getting the right facts, and that understanding, I think, is the basis of it.
It's good stuff. Lee, you recently wrote an article about value pricing in professional services.
Mm-hmm.
What is value pricing, and why should professional services firms consider implementing it moving forward?
Well, value pricing is the concept of basing your charges on the value you're actually delivering. And there are different strategies for doing that and different approaches to it. But it really contrasts it with what is traditional, which is hourly pricing, or a pricing according to the effort, time and materials pricing, that kind of thing, where they pay you for their effort. And that personally has always sort of rubbed me the wrong way as a client, because I felt like, oh, so if I get somebody who's really pretty dull and doesn't know what they're doing, it's going to cost me more. Like, that doesn't seem right, does it?
It's counterintuitive.
Yeah, it doesn't seem right. So, the person who really knows what they're doing is good. They deliver much more value faster. So if you can charge your price according to the value you're delivering, then you have a much more transparent and a fair way of pricing it. And if I do it more quickly, great. So much the better. So I'll give you a simple example. I know one accounting firm that reviews state and local taxes because people often overpay, or companies often overpay their state and local taxes because they don't understand the individual local regulations. So a large, like let's say a hotel company that has properties all over, they're probably overpaying. So what this company does is say, we'll review your state and local taxes in these states and we won't charge you anything. And if we save you money, we'll take half of what we save you. Like, okay, doesn't cost me anything. I get free money. Why wouldn't I? That's an example of value pricing, and it works extremely effectively. Now, you can do it the other way. You can say, well, if we were to accomplish this, what's the value of it to you? And we'll discount it by the certainty that we won't, and so we'll charge you this fixed amount of dollars to do the project. So it's similar in some ways to a fixed price project that's based on your best estimation of how much time it'll take you, but it's more of a fixed value.
Sounds like firms could really build in some margin with that.
They could, and it really, I think it's really appropriate because we're getting to a point where automation is having such an impact on professional services and what you do. So it's not just the amount of time. You can accomplish stuff much quicker, and using tools that you've brought to it and applying your expertise, you can do things more quickly. So that you're either going to be fighting automation all the way, holding back, or you're going to embrace it and get the full value of the impact you can have on the client.
Yeah, I know some firms kind of struggle with the whole concept of value pricing, and how do they convey that to their clients. I know that some are big on value billing, where they go in and they actually show the client all the extra value they provided, but the client wasn't charged for that. So is that kind of a way to get into value pricing?
Well, I think it's related, but value billing sometimes leads to where it's done a lot of times is discounting things.
Okay.
Because you didn't deliver the value. So sometimes when you get into value billing, you find out what it really is writing down a lot of your billing, because you didn't you can't actually charge for everything you delivered. It took you too long. So it took you longer, and it cost more than the value you actually delivered. So that's kind of the slippery slope with the value billing, although it is a related concept. And if you turn it in the positive direction, then it's kind of a form of value billing.
Right.
Lee, you mentioned earlier that one of the characteristics of high-growth professional services firms was that they understand their clients. And so obviously these firms must be doing some sort of research on their target market.
Yes.
What do you see as the value of doing that kind of research on your clients, and how can firms leverage that in their marketing?
I think the value is immense, and for me, it's not even a question anymore, because I've had so many direct personal experiences with companies I'm running where all of a sudden things weren't going the way you wanted them to, and you were losing it, and you're scratching your head, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. Is the market changed? Is this changed? Is that changed? And then it finally dawns on you, I better do some research on your market. And every single time I've done that, it's like, oh, I lost a thread here. And if we just adjust that, and we get back on track, and it starts growing again. So for me, the value is absolutely now intuitive, and I understand that if you understand your client and you can adapt your services, which in professional services, it's the easiest kind of product to adapt in some ways because it's manufactured every day. If you can adapt your services to do that need, it really creates more value for the client and creates value for you. So it helps you grow your firm. So the question is, what's the value of research? What's the value of growing your firm?
Well, it is interesting because, I can just say, at my time here at Hinge, I've seen a number of cases where we've proposed research to folks and they've said, oh, we don't need that because, we really know our markets and our clients and all that stuff. And then they hesitantly go in and they do the research, and they always come out of it with, that aha moment. Wow, I didn't realize
exactly.
that, as I went into it. So, it validates a lot of the points you were making.
Yeah, it is, and it's a thing that's not intuitive because you think you know somebody that you spend a lot of time with.
Right, exactly.
That's the human condition, but as any divorce lawyer will tell you, as you spend more time, you find out things that you didn't know.
So Lee, you've been doing research for quite some time now. Is there a particular research study that you found was the most fun or the most helpful or the most insightful?
Well, I'll tell you 2 or 3 early studies that we did, and then I'll talk about the professional services one. Okay. I think one of the earliest studies was by Bandura and Walters, and if you're a psychology major, you probably saw it. It's about observational learning, that people learn by observing others. And another one that was seminal on this was understanding of emotional or reciprocity in relationships, that people look at it and they adapt their behavior to what the other person is doing. And this allows you so much. It gives you the ability to influence and communicate when you understand those principles about how social interaction actually works. And frankly, some of the stuff that's been done on behavioral economics over the last years not only netted a few people some Nobel Prizes, but it's really shown how irrational people are. We think we're rational animals, but we're not. We're emotional animals with a rational, thin, rational shell over it. So those, I think, have really helped me understand. Those have been most influential in my career overall. In terms of the professional services one, I think the most insightful one was the first one we did where we really identified the whole concept of the high-growth firm and how they were doing things differently. They weren't spending any more money. They were the same size, same industries, but they were growing many times faster. And it's just fascinating and we've spent the last 10 years parsing it and understanding how the firms do it. What are the things they do differently? And it comes down to, as mentioned earlier, really understanding their client, really understanding where they get information, being very helpful to them, which builds up the trust, builds up the expertise, builds up all the things that people make selection decisions on. And so when you understand that and then you go in and do the research on your target audience, everything follows.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And I see how the two are related. You talked about how people are emotionally driven, and I would imagine that even buyers of professional services make some of their decisions based on those emotions as well.
Right. And it's this interesting mix of emotions and rationality that go into it. So these decisions now are often made in significant companies by multiple people, and so you also have the group dynamic happening in there. But when you look at them across bodies of research, you find out that there's certain things that are high probability. They're most likely they're going to be interested in, can you solve my problem? And they determine that by looking at, have you done it before? Do you know my industry? Can I work with you? Is this something I can afford? These are all kind of rational questions, all getting around to, can you do what I need you to do for me? And can I work with you?
Is it a good fit? Yeah.
Yeah, and they talk, people talk about trust and that's important. And it is that obviously if you don't trust someone, you're not going to hire them. But on the flip side, I've seen so many examples where we have people we absolutely trust explicitly. It's not a question of trust. We just don't think they know how to solve a problem.
Yeah, that's true.
I remember going into this one thing with a client, and we asked, well, who were you working with before? And he said, oh, my best friend. So I've known him since we were 3 years old. We're best friend. We do everything together. And I said, well, why are you working with us? I said, well, he couldn't solve my problems anymore. He'd gone as far as we could go with him. And I think that's true. Sometimes people misunderstand and they misjudge and they go with someone else because they don't realize you can solve their problem. And that's a failure in our own marketing. But, generally people are just looking for solutions to their problems and somebody they can work with. And yeah, they'd rather work with somebody they like rather than someone they detest. But if it gets down to, I'm sitting there, I got two surgeons. One is really a nice guy and he's never done this operation. And the other is the world-class leader in this and he's a real jerk. Put me under, jerk.
Yeah, but I think a lot of times, though, to your point, though, that first trigger is, can they solve my problem?
Yeah.
If they can, in their own head, come to a conclusion really quickly on that, then emotionally they buy into that. Mm-hmm. So, they pick Hinge over another company because they felt early on, wow, they could solve my problem. And then that really kind of directs a lot of their other decisions. Yeah. Emotionally. So.
Exactly. I think you're right. And they've also, we don't want to, there's other important aspects of this, mm-hmm. like trust.
Right.
And trust is generally built, if you look at the psychology literature, it's generally built on people giving something to you without asking something in return.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And that's what today's content marketing, that's what it's about.
Yes.
You're giving them some help, a perspective, some new information, something, and you're not asking for anything in return other than maybe an email signature, so you can give more things that are helpful, and you do develop the trust.
Yeah, and that's how you also develop your visible expertise.
Mm-hmm.
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the beauty of visible expertise is that these things all work together,
right.
and they're mutually reinforcing. What you do to develop your visible expertise is the same thing you do to develop trust, is the same thing you do to develop your craft and get better at it, so it becomes a self-reinforcing kind of system.
Yeah. I'm not going to say, Lee, but you've been running firms for quite a few years. And
since Abe Lincoln was a pup, huh?
And you've worked with a number of clients. I'd really like to know if you have a couple of tips or insights that you could share around leadership and growth.
I'm always suspicious of leadership mm-hmm. Advice, partly because there are people who can be very good leaders but don't understand why they are, what's working.
Right.
So a few of the things that I've observed and I think are verifiable by the research is the old say, you can accomplish just about anything as long as you do not need to take credit for it. So putting other people in the spotlight to develop and developing your team around giving them credit and gratitude, I think is one of the essential things. Another thing is the issue of trust, and it's in such short supply here that if you can create a work environment where people trust each other and they believe that you have their best interests in mind and you're looking out for them, then with that kind of thing, people will accept feedback. They'll work together on common goals and common objectives and so forth. So I think for me, those are a couple of the things that are just bedrock about human relationships and about leadership. And of course, people need to know where they're headed.
Right.
And where you're taking it, you need to have a common goal. So if you have a common goal and you're going to enlist other people and you can develop that kind of trust, I think those, to me, are the bedrocks of leadership.
Great.
So Lee, especially in professional services, like you said, the product is manufactured every day.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, high growth can't happen in a professional services organization without growth at the individual level.
Mm-hmm.
So what advice would you give to a professional services leader or practitioner looking to grow themselves professionally?
I think the advice is there's a couple of things that need to do that are counterintuitive or kind of counter their emotion. One of them is to focus. And as a young professional, almost all professionals want to get a variety of experience and a breadth of things, so they end up just taking a little bite. And focusing in on an area where you're going to develop expertise is one of the things that the visible experts I've interviewed over the year, almost everybody said, if I'd only known that. Second thing is having a plan to really work on that plan. It takes consistency of effort over time. And I think the third thing is to really align yourself and get to know your other experts, because that's where new ideas come from, that's where new inspiration, that's where referrals come from, and so forth. And I think those are the three things that are probably most important that people don't already know. And the things they already know is, yeah, you got to work hard. You got to be good at what you do. All of those things are important, and those are bedrock. But I think those things are some of the ones that really make the difference.
Oh, I think those are great tips, Lee. Thank you.
My pleasure.
What's the story on you wearing boots all the time?
It's a good question. I grew up wearing boots.
Okay.
I'm a farm boy from Minnesota.
Oh.
And so I always, comfortable, and that's how I'd spend my days in boots. So, and then I went through a period of time where I went into an academics and thing, and so I got away, and I had the Oxfords and stuff that everybody was wearing. And then one day I was working with a producer from New York, and he was wearing cowboy boots. And I said, well, that's odd. Why are you doing that? And he said, yeah, I really like boots. And I thought, so do I. So the next day I bought up my first pair of boots,
Okay.
and I've been wearing them ever since.
Nice.
And you're wearing them now.
I'm wearing them now, yeah.
So our audience can get a better sense of you, Lee. What do you do when you're not thinking about marketing and sweating things out here at Hinge?
Great question. Well, I have a number of things I love. My hobby is hot rods. I love fast cars, and so I have a 32 Ford with a 350 Chevy in it, and if you have a clue what that means, you know exactly what it is.
That's a beautiful car,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another thing, I enjoy reading. I enjoy grandkids. What a great way to, you get all the good parts and none of the bad stuff.
I'm jealous.
yeah, you're still in the first stage of it.
In the trenches taking grenades.
Yeah, love movies. So those are the things I do.
Great.
Well, Lee, if our audience if they want to get in contact with you, how can they reach out?
I'd recommend hingemarketing.com as the best way to do it, and of course I'm on LinkedIn and so forth, as you'd expect.
Well, Lee, thank you so much for sitting down with Kelly and I today. This was a lot of fun.
It's my pleasure.
It
Thank
is.
you guys.
I actually took a lot more notes than I thought I was going to.
You thought I was more boring, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
I learned something new about you, Lee.
So if you found this podcast helpful, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, go to your podcast app, up to the top, type in the search bar, The Visible Expert, and scroll on down to the very bottom. Leave us a rating and a review. It really helps. All right, so for our listeners out there, have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the Visible Expert Podcast.